Making a tongue drum is something that had been in my list for quite a while. I knew it was going to be quite a challenge, so I decided to eliminate as much variables as possible so that the margin for error could be smaller. I began researching intensively, watched all the videos I could find on people making these drums, watched videos of drums that are out there for sale, searched about woods, joinery, designs, all that stuff. Eventually what I decided to make was sort of a copy of a Schlagwerk log drum. It took me a while to go further on each step because the last thing I wanted to end up was with a horrible sounding instrument and call it a failure or remaking parts of the process. So I tried to be cautious and think 100 times before cutting into actual material and so on. If you do a bit of research, you will find out that most of tongue drums have paduk or wangi tops, and that's because these woods are more musical than others. I don't know much about this, but all I can say is that they vibrate and reverberate in specific ways that allowed for better, fuller, and easier to achieve notes, probably due to their density and hardness, but not just that. So I started by preparing the wangi, and after a close observation of the Schlagwerk drum, I noticed that the top is not a single piece, it's made out of 4 strips, so that's what I did. I also did it because my timber was a bit twisted, and this way I could obtain a flat board without as much wood removal. Here you can see the difference in the sound when the piece is being held in different spots. For the box sides, I used 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood and routed rabbets on the bottoms and sides on the routed table. You will want to use high quality materials and not cheap plywood, as it may affect the sound in the end. I planed it carefully, removing a very small amount on each pass until the board was 14mm or a little over ½ inch. I also made a groove in the middle of one of the largest faces to inlay a strip of wangi. There are many ways for cutting the keys, but since I made the template on the computer, I sent the file over to the Xcarve and headed carving the lines with a 1/16 straight bit. You can also use a jigsaw or a scroll saw and create other shapes for the keys. Steve Carmichael has a great video on how to make a tongue drum, and he used a jigsaw. Since wangi is a very splintery wood, I made a second pass with a V-bit to get a smoother look and feel. I made the top edges leveled and glued the top using two pieces of wood with a slight arc on them that will act as bow clamps. These are great for when you have a small amount of clamps and need to make pressure along the entire edge using just one clamp on each end. I flush trimmed the box and rounded over all the edges. After all, this is a musical instrument and your hands will be all over the place, so it's nice to make it round and comfortable. Still not getting good results, so I sit back and did more and more research, and I found a video from KRT Wood explaining his process to tuning his drum and how adding more mass to the box sides would bring the keys to a better tone and vibration. So I found some hard maple scraps and glued them super tight into both sides. Always make sure that your glue ups turn out perfect because a bad glue joint will mess with the final sound. I should have made the walls thicker from the beginning, and that way I could start fresh on the tuning, but I kept going and eventually worked fine. So here I was hitting the keys and writing down which note I was getting, and then went back and forth removing material until the wished note was achieved. You can change about 2 tones, so let's say you are getting a C and you want to go up to an E. It should work, but if you're getting a C and you want to go up to a G or down to a G, it's going to be super hard or even impossible. That's why the size of the keys also matter, and a bigger tongue is never going up to match a super small tongue. To tune it up, you have to remove material on the tip of the tongue, and if you want to go down, you remove material on the back of the tongue, where it meets the rest of the board. What I have noticed is that removing material on a perpendicular line is much more effective than drilling larger holes. Just be careful to not drill all the way through or even make the part of the tongue too thin and fragile. After being satisfied with the tuning, I screwed the bottom with lots of screws to make sure it was fully closed and the pressure is done along the entire edge. I finished it with 3 coats of water-based varnish. Finally, I sticked 4 foam pads that are typically used on drum kit cymbals. The tongue drum is done, and I think it sounds pretty good for a first handmade instrument. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it on the Patreon post, where you can find a PDF with more details about this build and free template. A big shout out to Rockler, Inventables, and all my Patreon supporters, and go get your hands dirty!